San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
SDCCU makes getting a great deal on an auto loan easy. Whether you're in the market for a new or used vehicle, you can complete your application online from the convenience of your home and get pre-qualified before you shop. And with rates as low as 1.99% APR and 90 days before you have to make your first payment, getting an auto loan has never been easier. Apply today at sdccu.com. SDCCU. It's not big bank banking, it's better.
Welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. I'm Scott Paulson from the UC San Diego Library. Joining me on this panel are two authors. Nate Powell is here, representing his book, Save It for Later. And John Woodrow Cox is here, representing his book, Children Under Fire. Both of these books were of interest to me because they really relay from the children's point of view, some specific issues of great importance. Yes, there are parents involved, but the voices of the children do come through in the books and the writing. For instance, Save It for Later from Nate Powell. Your children are characters in this book. They've been transmogrified into some delightful sort of cosplay of animals, but they're there in this book mostly because you're going through a journey of an election gone wrong and trying to guide your children through a world where you kind of made a promise to them that Trump wouldn't win, and he did. And this whole book is your family's journey of how you got through those 4 years. At least that's how I see it. For both authors, I'm going to ask you, did you have an agenda when you wrote this book? I hope you did. But was there a surprise somewhere along the way? So if it's all right, let's start with Nate. Nate, in your book, what was your hope that would come from this book when the audience read it? What was your hope, but what was a surprise along the way?
Certainly. Well, I make both fiction and nonfiction comics. I'm best known for my nonfiction work, but I don't particularly consider myself to be a nonfiction heavy cartoonist for whatever reason. I didn't necessarily have an intention to make this book until, I guess, by the end of 2017, recognizing that the normalization process during this authoritarian power grab was not only functioning, on the macro level, on the larger social and political end of the spectrum, but recognizing the smaller and more private ways in which we had already internalized a lot of the normalizing of authoritarianism and its presence in our lives. Specifically, I guess the impetus was that by the end of 2017, I recognized that for most people I knew, and especially for myself, there was often an assumption that there were so many fires burning at once that there simply wasn't enough bandwidth to reckon with, or even really like discuss the ways in which anxiety, depression, rage, doom, helplessness had affected us, not only like within the household, within a family unit, but also impacted our relationships with our neighbors and our community. And in fact, that a lot of these details from throughout 2016 and 2017, a lot of the minutia was kind of getting squirreled away and was in danger of being forgotten. So like in the long view of this, it's recognizing that, if we're going to be spending the entirety of the 2020s trying to prevent a successful authoritarian anti-democratic takeover of the United States, we're going to need to provide that bandwidth to allow for the private personal accounts with all of their political and social implications, as well as the larger dumpster fires that are burning. And I guess along the way, the main surprise was that I discovered that I, being from the tail end of Generation X, share more similarities with my parents' generation, with baby boomers, in terms of erroneous assumptions of the inevitability of progress, which had allowed for this space for fascism to get a foothold. And recognizing that basically I'm already a middle-aged person. It's already time for me to shut up and listen to my kids. And recognizing that the only way in which we're going to be successful is to set up a situation in which we are able to be self-critical, to be better listeners, and to not fall into the same traps that our parents have fallen into.
And this beautiful book also explains how to participate in a protest and how to do so safely. There's some very practical elements of this book for a family that's well worth for family to own. And the lettering is so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Now, before I get on to John, I just want to remind people who Nate Powell is. It's worth saying Nate Powell is a National Book Award-winning cartoonist whose work includes civil rights icon John Lewis's historic March trilogy. Did all the drawings for that. Also Come Again, Two Dead, Any Empire, Swallow Me Whole, and The Silence of Our Friends. Powell, that's you, Nate, has also received the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, 3 Eisner Awards, the Michael L. Prince Award, the Comic-Con International Inkpot Award. We're very proud of Comic-Con here in San Diego. Very humble beginning started here. 2 Ignatz Awards and the Walter Dean Myers Award. And he has discussed his work at the United Nations on MSNBC's Rachel Maddow Show, PBS, CNN, and Free Speech TV. And Nate lives in Bloomington, Indiana still. And you can visit him online at seemybrotherdance.org. And is it okay if we switch over to John for a moment now?
Go for it.
John Woodrow Cox is in the house. And John is a staff writer at the Washington Post. He was a finalist for the 2018 Pulitzer Prize in Feature Writing and has won Scripps Howard's Ernie Pyle Award for Human Interest Storytelling and the Dart Award for Excellence in Coverage of Trauma and Columbia Journalism School's Mike Berger Award for Human Interest Reporting, among other honors. He attended the University of Florida, where he has taught narrative writing and currently serves on the Department of Journalism's Advisory Council. He lives outside Washington, D.C. with his wife, Jen. I'm so glad you're both here, Nate and John. Now, John, your book is a close topic to San Diego. Children under fire, and it's the tragedy of gun violence that can happen. And that's a very close topic to San Diego, because the first major school gun violence situation happened to us here in 1979, when Brenda Spencer was in a house across the street from the school, and unfortunately she had access to a semi-automatic weapons, and 2 people died and many were injured, and that kind of was the beginning, apparently, and that's why we're so grateful you're here today, because it's something we can't forget. It's hard to forget because there was that Boomtown Rat song. Tell me why. I hate Mondays, and that song wasn't played on San Diego radio for the first several years because it was just too much for us, too close to us. But this is a topic that you've spent a lot of time with, gun violence, and in your book, Children Under Fire. Wow, you must have spent weeks and weeks and weeks and months with these families, because it's. I feel like I'm there, and you were definitely there. It reads beyond what I feel maybe your columns were. You had an editor did you have an editor who helped you turn your columns into a book? Because this feels like so much more than your wonderful columns.
Yeah, I actually worked on the book with the same editor who edited the series at the Post. She just knew the material so well, and of course I had a great editor at my publisher, Echo. But I had asked my editor to kind of stick with me, and I did a considerable amount of additional reporting on these kids after those stories ran. I went back and spent weeks with both of the 2 main subjects of the story, and several other kids as well. So it was a lot of immersion that it was about 3 years of reporting all together that began in 2017 and went up through last year.
Yep, and besides that original 3 years of reporting, then there was making this book, which is so important. And obviously you want people to continue to investigate and learn how these things happen and what we need to do to make it less of a commonplace situation. And again, I'm assuming you had an agenda when you wrote this book, and I feel there has been success. How much has this book succeeded, you feel, in raising awareness of this issue and getting people to discuss what needs to be done?
It's a hard book to read. I think it's a hard book for people to take on, to be willing to take on. But I think certainly the people who have read it, I think have been affected by it in the way that I hoped that they would be. The idea was to wake people up to the scope of this crisis. I think we look at gun violence, especially as it relates to kids, through this very narrow lens of who got shot. How many people got shot and who died. That's what the headlines pretty much capture. And what I found in reporting on these children, the 2 main kids who I follow in the book, neither of them were physically wounded by gun violence, but their lives have been destroyed by it. And, it's a crisis that affects not hundreds or thousands of kids, but literally millions of children. It's not an exaggeration to say that literally millions of children, their lives are shaped and devastated by gun violence every year. And, one of the original ideas was, back when I was working on the stories, and then certainly that was also true of the book, is to tell these stories through the lens of kids' eyes, right? Through that point of view, because so often we read about children entirely through an adult's perspective. And it was one way, I think, to make people care about an issue that most Americans are numb to, by telling it in a different way, right? By approaching gun violence in a different way and by telling it through the eyes of children. I mean, this weekend, nearly 200 people were killed this July 4th weekend. Nearly 200 people were killed in acts of gun violence in this country. It's a staggering number. And, most of us are just going to move on, right? But this is an epidemic that will live on long past COVID, and it was here long before COVID. So, it's something that I just feel such an urgency about, and hopefully the book delivers that.
Yes, and it was heartening to see how some of the people you've written about are on their way to being effective activists, and effective listeners,
right?
For those who, are still recovering,
right?
And Nate Powell, in your book, you did confess at one point that you were worried that you were pushing your children in a particular direction, but then you were very careful to point out that through your children's voices that they did want to be activists, they did want to protest, they did want to be involved. And do your children are your children proud of this book?
Yes, my older of the two is 9.5 now. And so a lot of this, covers experiences that are still very vivid to her, really from age 3 onward. And so it really is fascinating to have her arrive at an age and a certain kind of maturity that allows her to weigh in on a lot of these experiences that previously, I was allowing myself the luxury of viewing strictly from my parents' eye. But I mean, the fact is that one reason why I felt it was imperative to make this book, a lot of which has to do with breaking down very complicated social and political issues at a level that a young person can process, but also a level that reflects where their rapidly expanding worldview is. And really, I think one of the most important takeaways for people who don't have kids or who aren't around a lot of kids is the fact that kids notice and pick up all of this stuff anyway. It's not an issue about not bringing something up to spoil or dispel your kid's childhood or innocence. It has to do with listening for the inevitable times in which your kid is asking questions about a number of issues. And a lot of it really has to do with, getting ahead of other information sources, getting ahead of questions as they're formed, and simply being open to also the inevitability that the parents are going to be the out of touch people, and more quickly than you think. Yeah. And at that moment where you're called out by your kids, just like how each of us as young people called out our parents for being out of touch about a number of issues, that time arrives quickly. And when you first get called out, that's when it's time for you to shut up and listen and hopefully follow what the young people in your life have to say. And sometimes that does mean an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old.
It's such a beautiful book just to look at too. I do have a couple questions. This purple smoke, is it because red and blue make purple? Is that why there's purple smoke?
I wish. Really, that was a purely aesthetic decision. I was carrying over a little bit of the purple from actually, you know what? There's only a touch of purple on the front, but yeah, that was strictly aesthetic, trying to have something deep enough that would contrast with the gray, but not be too attention grabbing.
I like my story better.
Yeah, I like Scott's explanation.
I'll just give you that. You should start saying that now. I just stole that from the Clintons too, because they had matching lapels that were purple, and their point was that red and blue made purple.
Certainly.
But is there hope, Nate? Can red and blue make purple?
Well, I mean, there has to be hope. I'm not particularly optimistic right now, but a lot of that means I think it's urgent to accept the reality of the situation on the ground and understand that there is reason to be hopeful, but that has to do with providing space and providing a voice for the considerable majority of Americans who support democracy, who support a multiracial democracy, and recognizing that our survival against authoritarianism, our survival against fascism potentially, has to do with making space at the table. It has to do with being bold enough to set aside a lot of outmoded ideas, such as, the very privileged idea that things work themselves out, that the arc of the moral universe inevitably bends on its own towards justice. A lot of these are post-war, pre-9/11 concepts, which Generation X learned from baby boomers in the aftermath of World War II. And at times they do active harm in terms of my parents' generation being able to absorb what has happened in the past 5 or 6 years and recognizing that the old rules do not apply.
So, John, getting to your book, is there hope that there will be less gun violence? Will there be less victims?
I think to Nate's point, the status quo isn't going to get us there, right? Like the arc of this country is not bending toward fewer gun violence victims, and it's in part because at the federal level we're not doing anything about it, right? It's not going to happen on its own. There are things, small things, that we could do that could reduce the number of people killed by gun violence dramatically. At the end of the book, I sort of make 3 recommendations based entirely on reporting. And the one that I repeat most often is the most obvious, is that gun owners have to lock up the weapons that they have. They have to prevent the guns they have from falling into the hands of children. More than half of the school shootings since Columbine would not have happened if children just didn't have access to guns. Hundreds, thousands of children would not get shot accidentally or in acts of suicide every year if kids just didn't have access to guns. So that's one of those changes that wouldn't require gun owners to give up their guns or to go through a background check or be licensed, any of these things. It is sort of the bare minimum to ask someone with a deadly weapon to say, don't let a child get access to this weapon. But if we just did that one thing, we're talking about thousands of children whose lives would be dramatically altered. Both the child who maybe finds the gun and shoots their sibling or their parent or themselves, and then the victim and the witnesses. I mean, the list goes on, and then all those kids at schools, right? So we've just recently, I've created a database that tracks how many children have been at schools during an act of gun violence, a school shooting. And we had very narrow parameters. It had to happen during school hours, so we're ignoring things like football games and school dances. More than 250,000 children in the last 2 decades have gone through a school shooting. A meaningful number of those kids are still suffering from the trauma, and they didn't have to get shot to go through that. And again, this one thing, right? We can talk about background checks and banning assault weapons and all these sorts of things, but that's one small thing that we could do overnight that would save so many children from suffering. So the point being is it's attainable, right? We're never going to go from 43,000 plus. That's how many people died in shootings last year. We're never going to go from 43,000 to 0. That will never happen in this country, not in our lifetimes, certainly, and not in our children's lifetimes. But if we went from 43,000 to 30, wouldn't that be worth it? Or 25? That would be worth it. You're talking about thousands and thousands of people who are still living, kids who still have parents, people who have siblings. That would be worth it. And we can get there. Like we can actually make a difference, but it takes people making choices, and much of it has to happen at the federal level. And it's pretty simple. As long as the filibuster exists, it's unlikely that Democrats are going to get the 60 votes that they need. It is a myth that Americans are split entirely on issues of gun safety. The vast majority of Americans support most of these sort of common sense, obvious gun safety measures. Where we're split is on Capitol Hill in the Senate. That's where there is division. And it's really motivated by the gun lobby, by the NRA, that those senators in a handful of states are more afraid of the NRA than they are afraid of Mom's Demand and those groups. And that's really what it comes down to. 5 or 6 Americans are going to decide for all of us, whether we have new gun safety legislation or we don't.
Thank you, John. That's a great start to lock up your weapons. Now, getting back to the cover of your book, John, how involved were you with the look of this cover? I'm always curious about that.
Yeah. So I was involved. I mean, they sent me a handful of images. That was the one that was so arresting to me. That is a actual that's not a staged image. That's a little girl going through a lockdown drill, hiding under a desk. And we're going to go with a little bit of a different cover for the paperback. In part, this is such an intimidating book, right? And I think people coming out of the pandemic, a really dark period, asking people then to say, hey, take on this other American crisis, maybe was difficult for some people. And we knew that going in. But, I think it's a book that is not without hope, certainly, too. I think that the children, these two children who are central to the book and become best friends,
yes,
give me an enormous amount of hope, just on a personal level. Have a white girl from rural South Carolina and a black boy from Southeast DC, and they have become each other's therapists. They have become
starting as pen pals,
deeply supportive, right? Starting as pen pals, right? And just the most unlikely of friends, and they're friends entirely because of what gun violence took away from them. So, you talk about the activism and what Nate talked about, and how children, they're going to do it, and they're going to think about these things and engage with these issues, whether we think they will or discuss it with them or not. And these two kids are such good examples of that. We have Ava, the little girl in South Carolina, who's writing letters to Donald Trump saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about this? How are you going to keep kids from dying in their schools? And so, those kids are going to grow up. They're going to be in positions of leadership one day, and they're going to be making decisions. And they give me hope, because I really don't think this generation, the Columbine generation, is going to put up with what the last generation has.
Thank you, John. And getting back to Nate and his cover and choices, it's always so cool when there's a dust cover and then something beyond. And look, you even have, are these called end papers? I don't even think they do that anymore. And there's just so much extra material here, which, you're a graphic novelist, so, I think it's supposed to be a lot of extra info, but it's so bonus.
Part of the joy of visualizing a book-length comic in such a way is that in a cartoonist's mind, none of these pages are empty pages. In papers and the underneath the jacket, all of this can play a part with the larger narrative, but hopefully can play upon each other. So the undercovers of the front and back are in a conversation with each other, and the end papers are also in a conversation with each other.
And more advice on how to protest. Bring your leaf blowers to blow this smoke away. And bring the umbrellas. A lot of extra info. Yeah. So these books are both of them well worth buying as hardbacks. But it'll be exciting to see how much more sell for you, John, as a paperback too. I'm very excited for that, because there is some. It's hard to read, but it needs to be read. So I'm hoping that people take advantage of the lower priced paperback soon. But if you can, getting the hardback is fine too. And on tape, it's not a depressing listen. There's hope there, and so that's good to know. So before we sign off, John, is there someone in your book that you'd like to revisit as a subject sometime?
Yeah, I think both Ava and Tyshawn, the two central kids in the book, I don't think I'll ever be out of their lives. Those are two kids who, I'm really, really interested in who they are at 18, and I am hopeful, that their stories are going to take a turn, and that things will get better. And that was certainly part of the hope about the book, is that somebody who can help, somebody who can deal with that sort of level of childhood trauma that both of them have gone through might step forward and offer something up. So
yeah,
certainly
they're going to be leaders. from what you've
Yeah.
relayed. You just feel
I
it.
think so. I think so too.
And Nate, will your children let you write about them again sometime, do you think?
Perhaps. They are both have pretty strong voices as storytellers of their own. Here's my younger one has recently started a couple of book-length works, but I have a pretty strong feeling that all future studio time, which may involve them, will materially involve them on the pages. So what I look forward to is actually making work with them. I feel very lucky that I just, whether the world is burning or whether the fires are a little bit lower and dimmer, I just feel very lucky that what I've wanted to do since I was 11 is what I get to do as a job. And so whenever I'm able to put some meaning, some impact, some history, some context into the comics I make, I feel very lucky, and even luckier to be able to kind of pass this mode of storytelling and expression on to my kids.
Yes, bravo. And bravo to you both. We want to thank our authors, Nate Powell and John Woodrow Cox. We want to thank our booksellers who are involved with this festival. You should buy their books as hard copies. Visit bookshop.org/shop/San Diego Festival Books, as little letters. And please, ladies and gentlemen, won't you consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. And we all of you keep in mind that you can continue to join us for full programs of author panels, demos, live entertainment. It's all being streamed entirely online this year, as well as last, at San Diego festivalofbooks.com. And again, I'm Scott Paulson from UC San Diego, and how lucky was I to meet Nate Powell and John Woodrow Cox. Both of their books have strong ties to San Diego, and it was so important that they participate this year in our Festival of Books. Thank you so much for being here. Let's all thank the audience as well for joining us. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Sticking around, y'all.
Thanks so much.
Hello, I'm Jose Cruz. I'm the CEO for the San Diego Council on Literacy. We work with a network of 29 youth, adult, and family literacy programs that annually serve 160,000 residents of all ages at no cost. Our mission is to unite the community to support literacy. It's an exciting year for us. It's our 35th anniversary. It's also the 5th anniversary of the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. The San Diego Council on Literacy is a beneficiary of this event. So when you participate, you support literacy, especially through the author panels and just in general. So when you participate in this event, you also make it possible for another person, a child or an adult, to improve their reading and writing skills so they can read the books that you read. We have our favorite event activities. We like the Storytime Hour, and you probably have your favorites too. So we hope that you'll join us at the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books and learn more too about the work of the San Diego Council on Literacy by going to literacysandiego.org. Thank you.